Some people do not discover they are in love when someone says the words. They discover it the moment they believe they are about to lose that person forever. Damian Sullivan had built an empire that thrived on discipline, patience, and absolute control. Across Chicago, his name carried enough weight to silence rooms before he ever spoke. Rivals respected him, employees trusted him, and strangers rarely dared to look him directly in the eye. Yet inside the quiet walls of his private estate, there was one person who treated him as nothing more and nothing less than another human being. Naomi Carter arrived every morning before sunrise carrying a warm smile, a neatly organized schedule, and a calm presence that somehow made even the largest mansion feel less empty. As his plus-size black caregiver, she never seemed impressed by expensive watches, luxury cars, or private security. She cared only about whether he had taken his medication on time, whether he had eaten a proper breakfast, and whether he was sleeping enough despite the endless demands placed upon him. Damian never admitted how much those simple questions had begun to matter. Somewhere between routine health checks, quiet conversations over morning coffee, and long afternoons filled with paperwork, her kindness had become part of the rhythm of his life. He simply never realized it until one ordinary Friday evening. Damian left his downtown office later than expected after a meeting that had stretched nearly an hour beyond schedule. As his driver guided the sedan through busy city streets glowing beneath rows of streetlights, Damian happened to glance through the window toward a small Italian restaurant he had passed dozens of times before. His attention stopped instantly. Standing beneath the soft golden lights outside the entrance was Naomi. She was wearing a simple navy blue dress instead of her usual work clothes, and for the first time he noticed how naturally elegant she looked when she was not focused on taking care of someone else. A few seconds later, another man approached her carrying a bouquet of white lilies. Naomi smiled warmly as she accepted the flowers before they disappeared together. Through the restaurant doors, Damian felt something unfamiliar tighten inside his chest. It was not anger. It was not disappointment. It was something far more uncomfortable because it refused to obey logic. Without taking his eyes from the entrance, he quietly asked his driver to pull over across the street. He told himself he only wanted to make sure Naomi was safe. He told himself it was simple concern for someone who worked in his home every day. Yet even he did not believe those excuses. Through the large front windows, he watched the mysterious man pull out a chair before Naomi sat down. They laughed together with an ease that suggested they had already met before. A server placed menus on the table, and moments later the bouquet rested beside Naomi as she continued smiling in a way Damian had never seen inside the estate. The sight unsettled him far more than it should have. He suddenly realized there were entire parts of Naomi's life he knew nothing about. She had listened to his worries, protected his health, and quietly stood beside him through difficult days, yet he had never asked what happened after she left work each evening. As traffic continued moving around the quiet restaurant, Damian remained motionless inside the car, unable to explain why watching someone else's happiness felt strangely like watching his own heart drift beyond his reach. Damian Sullivan did not tell his driver to leave. Instead, he remained parked across the street, watching the warm lights spill through the restaurant windows while countless questions quietly filled the silence around him. He had spent years studying people because his position demanded it. He knew how to recognize fear, ambition, deception, and loyalty within seconds. Yet at that moment, he realized he understood almost nothing about the woman who had become the calmest part of his life. Inside the restaurant, Naomi Carter appeared completely relaxed. The long workdays, endless responsibilities, and quiet exhaustion she often carried at the estate seemed to disappear as she spoke with the well-dressed man seated across from her. Damian noticed the bouquet of white lilies resting carefully beside the table. Instead of being pushed aside, every small detail seemed to confirm a story that existed only inside his own mind. The waiter arrived carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water before placing a leather folder on the table. Naomi looked at it with surprise while the man smiled encouragingly. She slowly opened the folder and began reading. A few moments later, she lowered her head, covering her mouth as tears quietly gathered in her eyes. The man reached across the table and gently offered her a handkerchief. Naomi accepted it with a grateful smile before carefully folding several pages back into the folder. Damian never heard a single word spoken between them. He only saw expressions, gestures, and moments that seemed painfully intimate from a distance. His imagination immediately connected every missing piece into a conclusion that felt impossible to ignore. He convinced himself that the folder contained plans for a future they were building together. He wondered if the flowers marked the beginning of a new chapter in Naomi's life, one that no longer included the estate where she spent so much of her time. For reasons he could not explain, that thought settled heavily upon his heart. Nearly an hour passed before the dinner ended. The mysterious man insisted on paying the bill despite Naomi politely reaching for her purse. They stepped outside into the cool evening air, where they spoke for another few minutes beneath the glow of the streetlights. Before leaving, the man handed Naomi a sealed envelope. She accepted it carefully, thanked him with genuine warmth, and then walked toward her own car. There was no embrace, no romantic display, and no obvious declaration of affection. Even so, Damien believed he had witnessed enough. The absence of certainty somehow made every possibility feel even more convincing. He quietly instructed his driver to return to the estate. During the ride home, the Chicago skyline passed beyond the windows without capturing his attention. His thoughts remained fixed on the restaurant, the flowers, the tears, and the envelope. By the time the car entered the estate gates, he had unknowingly transformed scattered observations into unquestionable truth. When Naomi arrived for work early the next morning, she greeted him with the same gentle smile she offered every day and asked whether he had slept well. Damien answered politely, but his voice carried a distance she had never heard before. Naomi noticed the change immediately, yet she could not understand what had happened overnight. As she continued preparing his morning medication with the same quiet care as always, Damien looked at her for a brief moment before turning away. Without realizing it, he had already begun building walls between them, and every brick was made from assumptions instead of facts. The days that followed settled into an uncomfortable routine that neither Damien Sullivan nor Naomi Carter knew how to break. Every morning began exactly as it always had. Naomi arrived before sunrise, reviewed his schedule, prepared his medication, and quietly reminded him to eat breakfast before his first meeting. Nothing about her work changed. She remained patient, attentive, and thoughtful in every detail. The only difference was Damien. He no longer lingered over morning coffee to ask about her day. The casual conversations that once filled quiet moments disappeared behind short, polite answers. He buried himself in business reports whenever she entered the room, convincing himself that emotional distance was the wisest choice. Naomi noticed the change almost immediately. At first she assumed he was overwhelmed with work. Then she wondered if his health had become more stressful than he admitted. By the middle of the week, she realized neither explanation truly fit. Whenever she asked whether something was wrong, Damien responded with the same calm smile and the same familiar sentence. "Everything is fine." The words sounded courteous, but they lacked the warmth she had grown accustomed to hearing. She respected his privacy and never pressed further, yet an uneasy feeling remained with her throughout each day. Damien, meanwhile, found himself watching Naomi more carefully than ever before. Every time her phone vibrated, he wondered who had sent the message. Every time she smiled while reading an email, his thoughts returned to the restaurant. He disliked the person he was becoming, but he could not silence the questions that continued growing inside him. Finally, after another restless night, he called Samuel Carter into his private office. Samuel had protected the Sullivan family for more than 15 years and had earned Damien's complete confidence through professionalism and discretion. Damien hesitated before speaking, almost embarrassed by the request he was about to make. "There is someone I need you to look into," he said quietly. Samuel nodded without interruption. "Her name is Naomi Carter." For the first time in many years, Samuel appeared genuinely surprised. "Naomi." Damien looked toward the windows overlooking the estate gardens before continuing. "Not her. I want to know about the man she met last Friday evening." Samuel accepted the assignment without asking unnecessary questions. Over the next 2 days, he relied only on lawful background research, publicly available records, and professional contacts. The answer arrived much faster than either man expected. On Friday afternoon, Samuel returned carrying a slim folder. "The man is Benjamin Hayes," he explained. "He is a respected estate planning attorney with an excellent professional reputation. No criminal history. No financial investigations. No ethics complaints. He specializes in family trusts, wills, elder care planning, and charitable foundations. Damien quietly studied the report. Every page suggested Benjamin Hayes was exactly who he claimed to be. There was nothing suspicious, nothing dangerous, and nothing connected to organized crime or hidden business interests. Logic told Damien the investigation should have ended there. Instead, a different question began taking its place. If Benjamin was simply an attorney, why had Naomi never mentioned him? Why had she accepted flowers? Why had she cried while reading those documents? Samuel closed the folder and looked directly at Damien. Sometimes the truth is much simpler than we imagine, he said calmly. Damien gave a slow nod, yet the uncertainty remained. He realized facts had answered the identity of the man, but they had not answered the questions that mattered most. Somewhere beyond those neatly organized pages remained a story Naomi had never shared, and for reasons he could not explain, his heart feared the ending long before he knew the beginning. By the following Monday, the quiet distance between Damien Sullivan and Naomi Carter had become impossible to ignore. The estate continued operating with its usual precision, but something invisible had changed beneath the familiar routines. Naomi still remembered every medication schedule without checking her notes, prepared balanced meals exactly as his physician recommended, and adjusted his calendar whenever unexpected meetings appeared. Her professionalism never wavered because caring for others had always been more than a job to her. Even so, she could not understand why the man who had once trusted her with his most difficult days now seemed determined to keep every conversation as brief as possible. Damien noticed the concern in her eyes more than once, yet each time he convinced himself that creating emotional distance was the responsible choice. If Naomi had found happiness with someone else, then allowing his own feelings to grow would only make life more complicated for both of them. It sounded reasonable inside his mind, but his heart refused to cooperate. Every quiet moment reminded him how naturally she had become part of his daily life. Late that afternoon, Naomi knocked softly on the door of his private office, carrying a cup of freshly brewed coffee prepared exactly the way he preferred it. She placed the cup on his desk before speaking with gentle hesitation. "Mr. Sullivan, may I ask you something?" Damien looked up from the financial reports spread across the polished wood. "Of course." Naomi folded her hands together, searching for the right words. "Have I done something to disappoint you?" The question lingered between them longer than either expected. Damien immediately wanted to answer no, because the truth was exactly the opposite. She had never given him a reason to doubt her character. Yet the images from the restaurant refused to disappear. He lowered his eyes for a brief moment before replying carefully. "You have done your job exceptionally well." Naomi gave a faint smile that quickly faded. "That is not what I asked." Silence settled over the office. Sunlight stretched across the floor as the afternoon slowly drifted toward evening. Damien nearly told her everything. He nearly admitted that he had seen her with Benjamin Hayes and that jealousy had quietly replaced certainty. Instead, he stopped himself. If there truly was another man in her life, asking those questions would only expose feelings he had never intended to reveal. Naomi watched him struggle to find an answer before quietly speaking again. "There are a few personal matters I've been handling outside of work. They should be finished very soon. When everything is complete, I promise you will understand why I could not explain them earlier." Her voice carried honesty rather than defensiveness. Damien heard every word, but uncertainty remained stronger than trust. He gave a polite nod without asking another question, and Naomi respectfully left the office believing she had at least eased some of his concerns. Unfortunately, the opposite had happened. As soon as the door closed, Damien wondered why someone with nothing to hide could not simply tell him the truth. At nearly the same moment, across another part of downtown Chicago, Victor Kane received an unexpected business briefing mentioning that Benjamin Hayes had recently been seen meeting several times with an employee connected to the Sullivan estate. Victor had no interest in Naomi herself, but years of competing against Damien had taught him one valuable lesson. Whenever emotions entered the life of a disciplined man, judgment often became easier to influence. A quiet misunderstanding that should have ended with one honest conversation was about to attract the attention of someone willing to benefit from every unanswered question. Victor Kane had spent enough years competing against Damien Sullivan to understand one simple truth. Powerful men rarely made their biggest mistakes during business negotiations. They made them when emotions quietly replaced reason. He instructed one of his assistants to gather only publicly available information about Benjamin Hayes and the recent visits connected to the Sullivan estate. There would be no illegal surveillance, no fabricated evidence, and no false accusations. Victor understood that the most convincing deception was often built entirely from real facts arranged in the wrong order. While that quiet plan slowly unfolded, life inside the Sullivan estate continued with the same familiar rhythm. Although the growing silence between Damien and Naomi Carter became more painful each day, Damien found himself watching the front entrance every morning, waiting for the sound of Naomi's footsteps before pretending not to notice her arrival. He disliked the jealousy growing inside him because it did not resemble the disciplined man he had spent years becoming. Yet every time he remembered the flowers, the dinner, and the sealed envelope, uncertainty returned stronger than before. Naomi sensed the emotional distance but remained committed to her work. She continued organizing his appointments, monitoring his health, and making certain every detail of his daily routine was handled with quiet excellence. She believed that once the remaining legal documents were completed, she could finally explain everything without breaking the promise she had made to Benjamin Hayes regarding the confidential legal process. Late Wednesday afternoon, Damien received an unmarked envelope delivered with the ordinary business correspondence arriving at the estate. Inside were two printed photographs. One showed Naomi entering Benjamin Hayes' office earlier that week. The other captured Benjamin handing her another sealed envelope near the building entrance. There was no threatening message and no demand for money. Beneath the photographs appeared only a single typed sentence. Some people are better at keeping secrets than you realize. Damien stared at the page without speaking. Every image was authentic. Every event had actually happened. Yet whoever had mailed the envelope had carefully removed every piece of surrounding context. Before Damien could allow his thoughts to travel any further, Samuel Carter entered the office carrying updated security reports. He immediately noticed the photographs resting across the desk. After quietly examining them, Samuel looked back at Damien with the same calm professionalism that had guided him for years. "These pictures prove only that Naomi met with Benjamin Hayes again," he said. "They do not prove why." Damien slowly leaned back in his chair. "Then why does she keep hiding it?" Samuel answered without hesitation. "Maybe because the secret does not belong only to her." Those words remained with Damien long after Samuel left the room. That evening, Naomi stopped by his office before returning home. She noticed the fatigue on his face and gently asked whether he was feeling well enough to keep tomorrow's demanding schedule. Damien looked at her for several quiet seconds before finally asking the question he had been avoiding for weeks. "Naomi, are you seeing someone?" She seemed genuinely surprised. A brief silence followed before she answered with complete honesty. "There is someone helping me through something very important, but I cannot explain everything until the legal process is finished. I hope you can trust me a little longer." Damien wanted to believe her. He truly did. But the photographs, the unanswered questions, and his own fear continued pulling him toward the wrong conclusions. As Naomi quietly left the office, she believed one final appointment with Benjamin Hayes would bring every misunderstanding to an end. Neither of them realized that the truth was now closer than ever, while someone else was already preparing to turn their silence into an even greater test of trust. Thursday arrived carrying a quiet sense of finality that only Naomi Carter could feel. Before leaving for work that morning, she received a brief phone call from Benjamin Hayes confirming that the last legal appointment had been scheduled for the following evening. After one final signature, every document connected to her late father's estate would become official, and her mother's long-term medical care would be permanently protected through the charitable trust he had established years before his passing. Naomi closed her eyes with relief as she thanked him. She had spent months balancing demanding work, endless paperwork, and private worries. Without allowing any of it to affect the quality of care she gave Damien Sullivan. At last, the burden she had carried alone was almost over. She quietly promised herself that once everything became official, Damien would be the first person she told. She believed honesty would finally erase the painful distance that had grown between them. Across town, Damien sat alone in his office long after the morning meetings had ended. The anonymous photographs remained locked inside a desk drawer, yet they occupied his thoughts far more than the business contracts spread across his desk. Samuel Carter entered with the latest security briefing before noticing the untouched paperwork. "You have read the same page 3 times, he observed calmly. Damien gave a faint smile that quickly disappeared. "I keep thinking about everything I have seen." Samuel nodded before replying with quiet certainty. "You have seen pieces. You have not seen the whole picture." Damien remained silent. Those words echoed the same advice Samuel had offered from the beginning. Facts mattered more than assumptions. Evidence mattered more than fear. For the first time in weeks, Damien began asking himself a question he had carefully avoided. What if Naomi had never given him a real reason to doubt her? That afternoon, Naomi completed Damien's routine medical examination and organized the schedule for the following day. Before leaving the office, she hesitated near the doorway. "Mr. Sullivan," she said gently, "tomorrow evening I have one personal appointment after work. When it is finished, I would really like to explain everything to you. I know you have questions." Damien looked at her for several quiet seconds. The honesty in her voice felt impossible to ignore. "Tomorrow," he answered softly. "I will be here." Naomi smiled with visible relief before leaving the room. Neither of them noticed that another pair of eyes had already begun watching events from a distance. Victor Kane's assistant had lawfully observed Benjamin Hayes's office during normal business hours after recognizing the repeated visits mentioned in public scheduling records. When Naomi's appointment for the following evening was confirmed, that information quickly reached Victor. He did not need to invent lies or manufacture false evidence. He intended only to place carefully timed facts in front of Damien and allow fear to finish the work on its own. As evening settled over Chicago, Damien stood alone beside the large windows overlooking the estate gardens. He suddenly realized that during all the weeks he had spent searching for answers, he had trusted background reports, photographs, and strangers more than the woman who had faithfully cared for him every single day. That realization weighed more heavily upon him than jealousy ever had. Somewhere across the city, Naomi prepared the folder containing the final documents she would sign the next evening, believing the misunderstanding was finally about to end. Neither of them realized that before the truth could bring peace, one last carefully timed test of trust was waiting just ahead. Friday arrived with clear skies above Chicago, but neither Damien Sullivan nor Naomi Carter realized how much depended upon the next few hours. Naomi left the estate shortly after finishing her afternoon responsibilities, carrying a neatly organized folder that represented months of quiet sacrifice. She drove toward Benjamin Hayes's downtown office, believing she was finally approaching the end of a chapter that had demanded more strength than anyone around her had ever known. Before stepping inside the building, she paused for a moment, taking a slow breath as relief quietly replaced the anxiety she had carried for so long. Meanwhile, Damien remained in his office, staring at the city skyline beyond the windows. Throughout the entire day, Samuel Carter's words continued returning to his thoughts. Facts mattered more than assumptions. Trust mattered more than fear. For weeks, he had allowed scattered moments to become complete conclusions without ever giving Naomi the opportunity to explain. He suddenly recognized that the greatest mistake had never been jealousy itself. The greatest mistake had been believing silence was proof, instead of simply an invitation to ask one honest question. At almost the same moment, Victor Kane received another update from his assistant. Naomi had just entered Benjamin Hayes's office exactly as expected. Within minutes, an anonymous message reached Damien's private phone. Attached was a recent photograph showing Naomi walking through the attorney's front entrance while carrying her folder. Beneath the image appeared only one sentence. "She chose to meet him again before speaking to you." Damien stared at the screen for several seconds. A week earlier, that message would have confirmed every fear already growing inside him. Now it produced a very different reaction. He slowly locked the phone and placed it on his desk without replying. Samuel, who had entered to discuss the afternoon security schedule, noticed the brief exchange. "Another anonymous message?" he asked calmly. Damien nodded. "Yes." Samuel waited quietly. After a long silence, Damien finally stood from his chair and reached for his coat. "I am finished allowing strangers to explain Naomi's life to me," he said. "If I want the truth, I should hear it from the person I claim to trust." Samuel gave a small approving smile before following him downstairs. Less than 30 minutes later, Damien arrived outside Benjamin Hayes's office building. Instead of rushing inside with accusations, he stopped near the reception area and asked politely whether Naomi Carter was still meeting with Mr. Hayes. The receptionist smiled warmly and explained that the appointment was nearly complete. She invited him to wait only a few more minutes. Damien quietly accepted the invitation and took a seat. Through the partially opened office door, he heard Benjamin's calm voice. Everything has now been finalized. Your mother's long-term medical care is fully protected exactly as your father wanted. He planned every detail because he never wanted you carrying this burden alone. Damien lowered his eyes as every assumption he had built over the past several weeks quietly collapsed. There had never been secret promises between two people in love. There had only been a devoted daughter honoring her late father's final wishes while protecting her mother's future with dignity and grace. A few moments later, the office door opened. Naomi stepped into the hallway holding the completed documents against her chest. She looked surprised to see Damien waiting there, but before uncertainty could appear in her eyes, he spoke with complete sincerity. Naomi, he said softly, before you explain anything, there is something I need to say first. I should have trusted the person who earned my trust instead of believing the stories my own fears created. In that quiet hallway, neither power nor status mattered anymore, because the strongest man in the room had finally discovered that real strength begins with the courage to listen. Naomi Carter stood quietly in the hallway, still holding the folder that had consumed months of her life, while Damien Sullivan struggled to find words worthy of the moment. She had never seen uncertainty in his eyes before. The confident mafia boss who always seemed to have every answer now looked like a man trying to understand how he had become a stranger to his own heart. Naomi offered him a gentle smile, not because the past few weeks had been easy, but because she recognized genuine regret when she saw it. Benjamin Hayes stepped out of his office, carrying one final envelope before respectfully excusing himself. Everything is complete, he said warmly. The trust has been recorded, the medical care has been secured, and this belongs to you. He handed Naomi a sealed letter written by her late father years earlier, then quietly walked away, leaving them alone. Naomi looked down at the familiar handwriting before carefully opening the envelope. As she began reading, her eyes slowly filled with tears. Her father thanked her for the sacrifices she had made, reminded her that kindness was never weakness, and expressed his hope that one day she would allow herself to accept happiness instead of carrying every burden alone. Damien remained silent, realizing how little he had known about the private struggles she faced after leaving the estate each evening. When Naomi finished reading, she carefully folded the letter and placed it back inside the envelope. I wanted to tell you everything, she said softly, but Benjamin asked me to wait until every legal document was complete. If something unexpected had happened before then, the trust could have become much more complicated. I promised I would keep everything confidential. Damien slowly nodded. You kept your promise. His voice grew quieter. I did not keep mine. I promised myself that I would judge people by their character, yet I judged you by my fears. Naomi looked at him with calm understanding instead of anger. Fear makes all of us imagine stories that are not real. What matters is whether we are willing to listen once the truth arrives. Those simple words settled deeply inside Damien. During the drive back to the estate, neither of them felt pressured to fill every moment with conversation. The silence that had once separated them now felt peaceful because it no longer carried suspicion. As the city lights reflected across the windshield, Damien finally spoke again. When I saw you at the restaurant, I thought I was watching someone take you away from my life. Naomi turned toward him with quiet surprise before smiling gently. Benjamin invited me there because he wanted to explain my father's trust before I signed anything. The white lilies were not from him. They were sent by the charitable foundation that my father established. Benjamin simply brought them to the meeting because they arrived at his office that afternoon. Damien let out a slow breath, almost laughing at how many sleepless nights had grown from one misunderstanding. Back at the estate, he held the front door open for Naomi, not out of obligation, but out of sincere respect. Before they walked inside, he paused beneath the soft porch lights. I cannot change the way I doubted you, he said, but I can choose how I treat you from this day forward. Naomi met his eyes with the same quiet confidence that had guided her from the beginning. "Trust is never rebuilt with one apology," she answered gently. "It is rebuilt one honest choice at a time." Damien accepted those words without argument because he understood they were true, and for the first time since that Friday evening outside the restaurant, he realized that love was never about holding someone closer through fear, but about earning the privilege of standing beside them through trust. 6 months passed, and the Sullivan estate no longer felt defined by polished marble floors, expensive artwork, or the quiet presence of private security. The greatest change could not be seen with the eye because it had taken place inside the people who called the estate home. Damien Sullivan still led his organization with the same discipline that had earned respect throughout Chicago, but those who worked beside him noticed that his leadership had become warmer without becoming weaker. He listened before making judgments, asked questions before reaching conclusions, and never allowed assumptions to replace trust again. Naomi Carter remained his caregiver, but their relationship had quietly evolved into something built upon mutual respect instead of unspoken distance. She continued reminding him to slow down during long workdays, encouraging him to protect his health with the same steady kindness she had shown from the very beginning. Damien, in return, respected every boundary she set and never forgot the lesson she had taught him without ever intending to become his teacher. One crisp autumn morning, Damien invited senior staff members to the estate for an announcement that surprised everyone in attendance. Standing beside Naomi, he introduced a new employee wellness initiative that would provide medical support, counseling services, and family care resources to every person working across his businesses, regardless of position or salary. The program had been inspired by someone who believed every human being deserved dignity long before they earned recognition. As the room filled with quiet applause, Damien looked toward Naomi with sincere gratitude instead of admiration from a distance. He understood that true leadership was measured not only by the success a person created, but also by the lives they helped protect. After the meeting ended, Samuel Carter joined them in the estate garden where colorful autumn leaves drifted across the stone pathways. He smiled as he looked at Damien. "You finally stopped investigating people who had already earned your trust." Damien laughed softly. "I learned that some of the strongest people never asked to be believed. They simply continue doing the right thing until the truth speaks for itself." Naomi smiled, but remained characteristically humble. "Trust grows slowly," she said. "It is built one honest decision at a time." Damien nodded because those words had become part of the way he now lived his life. Before the afternoon ended, he handed Naomi a simple envelope. Inside was an invitation to become Director of Employee Wellness for every Sullivan property while continuing her caregiving role during the transition. It was not offered as a reward or an obligation. It was an opportunity created from respect for her character, compassion, and wisdom. Naomi accepted after a quiet moment of reflection because she understood that the invitation represented something much greater than a new title. It represented confidence that had been earned rather than given. As the sun slowly settled beyond the Chicago skyline, the estate grew peaceful once again. The cold man who once believed control could protect his heart had discovered that trust required far greater courage, while the compassionate black caregiver who had quietly carried burdens no one else could see found herself standing beside someone who no longer tried to possess what he loved, but instead chose to honor it with patience, honesty, and respect. Their journey had never truly been about jealousy, secret meetings, or painful misunderstandings. It had always been about two very different people learning that genuine love cannot survive without trust, that dignity becomes stronger when it is protected instead of questioned, and that sometimes the greatest victory in life is not changing another person's heart, but allowing your own heart to become worthy of the love that has been patiently waiting beside you all along.